Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jared Hornsby, and I'm here today to help answer any general or technical questions that you may have. But before we get started, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Upgrading to Modernized Data Collection for Adobe Analytics with Web SDK. Here's today's timing breakdown. These numbers are just rough, so please don't hold us to these. At any point during today's webinar, if you have a question, please don't hesitate to submit using an Ask a Question tab at the right side of your screen. It's going to say Q&A, and you can drop in a question whenever you'd like. And you can also chat with your fellow attendees by clicking the chat function on the right side of your screen. Please let us know where you are coming in from. Here's a bit about us over at CMS Wire. We were founded in 2003, and we cover the primary topics that you see here on this slide. And you can read more of our great content and register for upcoming conferences and webinars, all by visiting cmswire.com. I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Adobe, for making today's webinar possible. Only Adobe gives you everything you need to design and deliver exceptional digital experiences. And over from Adobe today, we have the Senior Product Manager, Mr. Shay O'Reilly, to tell us a little bit more. Shay, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Jared. So happy to see everybody. Glad you're here. As Jared mentioned, I'm a product manager with analytics, covering data collection for analytics and customer journey analytics. Here today to talk to you about some great new developments we have in terms of how you can migrate from using traditional app measurement to send data analytics to more modern ways of sending data analytics. There's a lot of great stuff that's out there, and we're making it easier to get at that great stuff. So here's an overview of what we're going to do. We're going to start with an introduction from myself, ask you a few questions about who you all are, just to get a sense of that, do a bit of level setting, and then we're going to go set some context. So I'm going to talk about what the Web SDK is, what the Experience Edge is, and what Experience Platform is. After that, we'll talk about migration pathways. So there's kind of this large ecosystem now of solutions and ways you can send your data. We want to talk about, as someone who's an analytics user, Adobe Analytics user, using that measurement to send their data, what the possible ways there are to migrate to using Web SDK, to using Experience Edge, to using AEP and applications like CJA that run on AEP. And AEP is Adobe Experience Platform. Finally, we'll get into some of the new changes we have. That's the core of what I want to talk about today. Some of the ways we're making it easier and more streamlined to migrate to the Web SDK for analytics. Do a little bit of a demo to show you how that is in the UI. We've got some things that have been released, as well as some things we're releasing later this month. So all coming very soon. And then at the end, we'll review and wrap up. Great. So at a high level, here's what we're going to talk about today: an easier phased migration to Web SDK and Adobe Experience Platform. The key piece is you can use your existing client-side analytics data structure to send data to analytics. Before this, your option to see if you're sending data to analytics using the Web SDK and Experience Platform, you had to map it into XDM. So you had to express that analytics data in the structure of XDM, even if it was only going to analytics, which doesn't really need XDM. So this allows you, if you've built up client-side data structures like product strings or eVars, you can just send them through as is to analytics, and analytics will ingest them. And that represents sort of a nice intermediate step, an easy way to take advantage of Web SDK and Experience Edge. And then the second bullet point, if and when you want to migrate to sending data into Experience Platform, that does need to be an XDM, but we're making it easier for you to do some server-side options on XDM to map into XDM, and I'll show you those. So there's a lot of possibilities, and mapping to XDM can be done in lots of different ways, client-side as well as server-side, but what we're announcing now is an easier way to do it, at least on the server side. And that's kind of a high-level overview. We're going to talk at a pretty wide range of topics today, from high-level overviews of what Experience Platform is, what Web SDK is, into some of the nitty-gritty of the details. Hopefully it's pretty intelligible. We'll have documentation you can follow up with later. This session will be recorded, so lots of things to help you with that. First, though, would love to get a sense from you about, I'll open this up for you now and get the poll on the stage. Where are you in terms of your experience, experience with Web SDK so far? Let me just bring the slide back up, actually. So are you researching, just starting to learn about the Web SDK? I know a lot of people out there have like heard about it, haven't really, started in a practical way yet. That's totally fine. Maybe you're in the planning process, so you have specific plans, a specific project in mind, but you haven't yet started it. You're maybe scoping it out or understanding the ins and outs of it. In process, currently working in transition, have something underway, and then been around the block at least once, let's say. So having already implemented the Web SDK on some live pages, just curious to get a sense of where folks are in terms of this, and I'll share what our results are so far. Yeah, it looks like, not too surprisingly, we've got a higher percentage of people in the researching stage, a little earlier in the funnel, but about a decent number planning or in process, underway. Wow, it's getting a little stronger towards the researching and that sole vote for having been around the block, which is great. So we're introducing people. We're getting to you early here, and hopefully this will help you understand more about how this works. So that's good picture. I'm going to stop sharing, close that, and then one more poll I'd like to open to you, a second one. Um, I would like to understand so far if you've run into barriers to adopting the Web SDK. What's been in the way of that? You know, is it time? Is it resources? Other priorities? Other tech debt? Or just unsure or other things? It's sort of a catch-all for other ones. What we're talking about today is, we'll talk a little about all the great things Web SDK, Experience Edge, and AEP have. There is some work involved in taking advantage of those, and what we're excited about is we're making that easier and easier. So knowing about like sort of what barriers or what challenges you have kept you from trying to go after that and take advantage of that goodness is great to know. So it looks like time and generally resources, higher priorities, as you might expect. That makes sense. Great. Well, thanks everybody. I appreciate all the input. Got a lot of votes there. That's good. Good participation. I'm going to jump back to our deck. And we'll jump in. And so as mentioned, I'm going to start with give you an overview of the Web SDK and Experience Edge, just to level set, give some context. This may be something a lot of you know, but I think it's good to just set that so we understand what the changes we're talking about and where they fit. So Experience Platform data collection is basically a endpoint and a way to send data to Adobe Analytics and then into Experience Platform, but as well as to other solutions. So it's sort of a new edge for where Adobe receives data sent from your app or your website. So just like Adobe Analytics has its own edge today. So if you're sending data from your website using app measurement to Adobe Analytics, app measurement sends it to an Adobe Analytics edge, and then that edge sends it into Adobe Analytics where you see it in your reporting. The same is true for Target and AEM, and those each has their own edge and their own sort of storage database. Like Analytics, you can send data into Experience Edge with our Web SDK or mobile SDK. Or if you have some other way of collecting your data, you want to collect it to yourself directly, you can use an API. So that's par for what analytics does. As you notice there, XDM is the common language that we're going to talk about how you can send data in a different format. What's different about Experience Edge is what happens after it reaches there. Instead of sending data just one solution, it can send it to any of the Adobe DX solutions. So you see all those on the right there in the red. At the top in the black box, the Experience Platform. We'll talk a little about that, but that's a centralized data store, modern data stack where you can do things like use CJA, AJO, real-time CDP. And it can also send data to analytics. That's the second box there, Target Audience Manager. So it's got that flexibility to send to any place. You can send one call from your page to any of those solutions. And another neat thing about Experience Edge is it can send data outside of Adobe to third parties. So if you want to capture an event on your page and send it to Meta or Facebook as part of their conversion API, you can do that. Same for Google, same to any third party, really. You can even use a workflow where you send it to a third party to get enriched and then on to another third party. So there's just a lot of power there in that you're collecting the one event from your page, sending it to the edge, and then out to any Adobe solution, any DX solution, or any third party. So a lot of power there in terms of the overall ecosystem, and that's one of the great advantages here. Today, we're going to focus. There's a lot here on this map, but we're going to focus on the green arrows here. So we're focusing on the Web SDK and collecting web event data from your page, sending to the Experience Edge, and then sending to analytics. We'll focus most on analytics, and then also a little bit on how you can send it to Experience Platform. So a little bit about Experience Platform, just to level set. Just a small box in that last slide. It's a new stack. It's our sort of next generation of tools that run on a shared data set. So when you send data into Experience Platform, all of our Experience Platform applications, you've got Customer Journey Analytics, which is sort of analogous and next generation of analytics. You've got Real-Time CDB, which is next generation, Audience Manager, and Journey Optimizer, which is next generation, roughly equivalent to Target, to personalization. They all sit on the same data layer, same data, and they're much more closely integrated because of that. And so you can have that nice flywheel of measurement, understanding what's going on in your site, doing some, coming up with personalization and activation ideas based on that measurement, implementing them in something like the CDP or Journey Optimizer, then measuring the effects of those personalizations and keeping that whole flywheel going happens much more seamlessly because of that unified modern data architecture. I will state Adobe Analytics remains. It's something we're continuing to support and continue to build out. So it's a matter of a maturity in building out to use some of the extra features that Experience Platform applications provide. Adobe Analytics remains really strong in what we're going to continue to support. So we're focusing on that today. I just want to mention the Experience Platform and its applications just for context. So we've talked a bit about the cool stuff Experience Edge does. Let's talk about what's cool about the Web SDK itself, that library on the web for sending data to Experience Edge. Firstly, it's much faster. So it's about 73% smaller than the previous library. So in the past, you'd have to load multiple libraries to use, say, analytics. Analytics, you would load the visitor identification library, as well as that measurement. If you had AEM or Target, you would have to load libraries for those. Now it's one library. It's been refactored and built in a modernized way, so it's much faster. Requests execute more quickly. You're going to have improved Lighthouse scores and things like that. And sort of coming with that, speed is and part of where that speed comes from is simplicity. It's a single, smaller library that can use to send data to all solutions. So you can send data to AEP, as I mentioned, which means you're also sending, it's available to be picked up by CJA, CDP, AJO, other use cases. And then you've got analytics, Target, AM, the traditional solutions, and then third-party events. So that's a nice thing, a simple, faster library. There's also edge features that you can take off. So Web SDK is the way you send data to Experience Edge. And with Web SDK and Edge combined, you have some really nice features like real-time segmentation and personalization. There's no lag, there's no round trip to a database. It's right at the edge. Events that go through the edge immediately update things like segment membership. And then there's first-person identifier, which is a way to use your own identifiers, your own cookie or other identifiers as the basis for the Adobe identifier. So the Adobe identifier, known as the ECID, is basically the ID, typical ID used across Adobe Analytics as well as Experience Platform. You can have that based on your own identifier, so that browser policies limit the Adobe Analytics ID. You can keep that ID for as long as you want rather than as long as they say. And it's basically tied to your identifier. So it's nice for extending cookie life in some situations. Cool. So let's talk a little about what all that looks like in terms of a page, a notional page here. We'll look at a page when it loads, and we'll look at the prior libraries versus Web SDK. So prior libraries, you might load a page, and the first thing that happens, so on the left there on the red at the top, you're looking at the prior libraries and sort of the sequence of things as they happened from start to finish. So you load the library, you retrieve an ECID, your identifier. You load the target library if you have that, which would retrieve personalization. You load the analytics library a little later because you want the personalization to happen right away. Then you send the analytics, and you might have a call to Audience Manager to retrieve audiences. What happens with the Web SDK is it performs all of those functions. And so you load the Web SDK, and then it does all that very quickly with often a bundled call. So you get your personalization, your segments, your ECID, and send the analytics. That's all done by the Web SDK. I do want to note there's also the case, those calls can be separated out if you want. So a lot of common use cases, people want to load the Web SDK. First thing, they want to get their personalization on the page immediately without any kind of flicker or delay. So that you can do that. And then you may want to wait a bit for more of the page to load, or perhaps some call or something to develop before sending the analytics call, more typically at the bottom of the page. So you can do that top of the page personalization, bottom of the page, measurement or analytics call. Still supported. You can bundle them or unbundle them however you choose. So that's a rough view of Web SDK, Experience Edge. Hopefully that sets the context a bit of why you'd want to do that, some of the goodness that you get from the Web SDK and Experience Edge, and what we discussed later in terms of functionality makes it easier to take advantage of those. Another area to level set on is data collection pathways for analytics and CJA. As we showed earlier, there's a lot of different ways to send data, and we want to talk about sort of the evolution here and how you can think about what we're discussing today, how it fits in that landscape. So once upon a time, you had, it was a simpler time. We had, this workflow here at Measurement.js to Analytics Edge to Analytics, and that was your option for analytics. That still exists today. That's still modern. At Measurement, Analytics Edge, Analytics, we're still investing in those. We're still growing them. They still do great things, particularly for web-only analysis. There's great opportunities what CJA, the next generation, can do in terms of data manipulation, even with web-only data, as well as including other channels. So there's benefits to CJA, but analytics remains analytics and remains, a really powerful option. But now you have this kind of new ecosystem, these new cool things you can take off. So if you look on the bottom there, you have the Web SDK, which will send data to Experience Edge. And if you follow that line along the bottom all the way to the right, it goes into Experience Platform, which is a shared data store that CJA can read from, as well as the other applications. I'll note that you have the blue line, which is kind of the original analytics collection from at Measurement to Analytics Edge to Analytics. That exists today. We're maintaining that. That's not going anywhere. But you have Web SDK to Experience Edge, and then you can use that to send data to analytics. So there's just kind of a new way to send data to analytics. You send that call from the page, it goes to Experience Edge. You can configure Experience Edge to send wherever you want, one of those destinations being analytics. Once it reaches analytics, it goes into the analytics application, just like any other hit reaching analytics. So most of what we talk about today are going to be ways to make it easier to move from that blue to the green. You may want to also, another option for getting data into Experience Platform, just for completeness, I'll mention the yellow line there. Once data is in analytics can route data directly into Experience Platform. That's also known as the Analytics Data Connector, or ADC. That data can go from analytics to CJ. So, and then lastly, I mentioned there's the direct approach. A lot of people recommend this, especially if you're starting new, if you want to re-implement completely. Definitely recommend Web SDK to Experience Edge and then into CJA and Experience Platform if CJA is what you want to take advantage of that new stuff. So that's more just a level set about the different pathways. I'll just reiterate that we're looking at this today. We're talking about making it easier to migrate, from the blue there, where at Measurement sends to Analytics Edge, to the green, where you use Web SDK to send to Experience Edge, which then forwards to Analytics. Hopefully that's all clear. We have some people manning the Q&A. If you have questions, I'll also be available to do a Q&A at the end. So let's dig into it. Let's talk about ways we're making it easier. Like, how are we making it easier? These are kind of exciting. So as I mentioned at the top, the main change is you can use your existing client-side data analytics structure to send data into analytics via the edge. In the past, you had to, if you had your analytics, you've got analytics in place, you've constructed your product strings, your event strings, eVars, you've got all your data sort of expressed in that analytics format, specific to analytics. You had to translate that into an XDM structure, a standardized data structure, so that it could then be ingested into analytics. And what we're allowing now is you don't need to take that step if you don't want to. There's value in doing that, into mapping into XDM. But for a lot of people, if you just want to take advantage of what WebSD can do and what Experience Edge can do, you can just use your existing data layer, existing data structure. As long as it's in that analytics format, makes sense in the analytics world, you just send it straight through. And then we made it easier, built some tools to make it easier when you later want to send that analytics data structure to the edge, but then you want to send it also into AEP. You can make a translation server side more easily. There's still client-side options to do that, but we've built some ways to make it easier on the client side, particularly with tricky data structures analytics has, like product string, event string, which are compound things and a little harder to manipulate and pull particular events out of. So to reiterate, as I mentioned, we're going through the green. We're talking about moving from blue to green here. Let's jump in and get a little technical now. We're going to dive down into what the data actually looks like. So here we have an XDM or a Web SDK payload, a valid Web SDK payload. In the top there, you may recognize XDM. So that's the standard data structure Adobe Experience Platform runs on. You can use that standard structure. You can create your own keys and things like that. That remains. You continue to have that option, but what we're adding is the option in that lower 3 sections there, the data section. You'll notice there's 3 different sections within that data: one for analytics, one for audience manager, one for target. And within those, they each have data structured in a way that's native to that solution. So looking at analytics, that sort of violet color, second from the top, the larger band, you can see there's an event string, there's a products string, props, eVars, context data. So if you've created that product string, for example, on your client side, you've already built that, you're sending that into analytics, and you want to migrate to Web SDK, just for sending data into analytics, you can do that. You don't need to make any changes to the product string. You can just use your existing client-side logic, your browser logic, to create that product string and then just send that product string on. So when this particular payload would get sent to Experience Edge and you've configured Experience Edge to route to analytics, that section under data _Adobe analytics, those events products, those would all automatically get ingested. So you now have kind of a new option. You can still use XDM to send data to analytics. There's a lot of documentation about certain XDM fields automatically map to analytics fields. Like there's an XDM field for eVar1, but in this case, you don't need to next go into that. You can make sort of a quicker move to using Web SDK instead of changing your data model on the client side. So I want to review here a little about the sort of migration we've seen. This kind of might give you a better picture of how things go. So traditionally, if you had the 3 separate solutions without Experience Edge, without Web SDK, and you're using tags, for example, Adobe's tag management solution, you'd have an analytics extension for constructing and the analytics payload and sending it on. You'd have one for target, one for audience manager. So you see the analytics extension sending props, eVars, events, analytics specific terms or data structures into analytics. But now what we have is we Experience Edge. You can have Web SDK, one library, one Web SDK, one tags extension, the Web SDK extension, send all 3 kinds of data. So in this case, you'll end up with Web SDK sending data to the edge. You can have props and eVars sent directly into analytics. If you want to send XDM to AEP, you can have those props and eVars translated into XDM. You can do that translation client side of that, sort of around that red line at the edge network. You can do it earlier on the client side if you want. So this is kind of the structure of how data flows right now. So in the past, it was just XDM. So even to the legacy solution, to the analytics and target and audience manage, those core solutions, you would send the legacy data structures to them. You would send XDM. Now you can send the legacy data structures. Hopefully that sets the stage a little. And then looking at prior steps, like how this would work, this will also give you an idea what that sort of implementation looks like now that we have this different flow. So in the past, you might have to do all 3 steps to move from what you see on the bottom, the traditional libraries, to the new Web SDK. You would have to define a schema, create a data set, map your data object to the XDM. Now you don't have to do that. There's a lot fewer things you can do. You define the XDM schema. You don't need to define the XDM schema or define the data set or map data to an object. And you don't have to do necessarily update your analytics processing rules. So I've thrown in some steps here for audience manager and target if you're using those. You essentially can compress this down to 2 smaller steps. There's still work, of course, but what we like is that there's a lot less work going on. So that's the high-level picture. Let's look at a demo. We can show you how this works going going live. So I want to share. Here we go. Gonna share. Give me a second. Wait for that to show up. Not quite appearing. There it is. Good. So I'm here in the tags UI. So I'm in. If I mouse over this, you see I'm in data collection under tags here, using our tag manager to capture things. So tags is the core of it is data elements, and so we've got data elements of some atomic ones here like page name and page type that would use to store like particular pieces of data like page name, page type. And then what we're going to talk about here is a variable data element. So this has already existed. This is nothing new. So as part of the Web SDK extension, and I'm using sort of a dev extension we used for displaying these solutions in Summit. We've got the variable data types. So you've got data and Adobe Analytics. And so what you had before was XDM, and now you have data. And so you can do target or analytics. But what you're basically saying is I've got this sort of composed thing, sort of like your S object that you compose together to put together. And so you can send that, and then this would allow you to construct it. And so we'll show, and you've got rules here. I'll show you how you can sort of, how this relates to previous things. Let me expand this out so it's a little more, the layout's a little better. I hope that works better for y'all. So you've got a rule, you've got in this case, the event triggering this rule is, you get the page bottom, and that doesn't change. And then in the past, you might have had Adobe Analytics extension, set variables, Adobe Analytics, send beacon. But what you have now is you can do the same with Web SDK. Instead of set variable, use update variable, and then you send the event. So you would use the Adobe Analytics set variables logic like this to say, set eVar1 equal to my data element page name, and set prop2 to my data element page type. So you may already have that logic. You can reproduce that same logic with the Web SDK here. So you've got the Web SDK extension. You've got the update variable. So there's a variable data element. You choose your variable data element. This is the one we were just looking at. This sort of this thing you use to compose. It might be, basically you can think of it as your S object that you used for Adobe Analytics. You can map the page name to eVar. You do the same sort of workflow of mapping. You match the page type to prop1. You can set eVars, props, events. You've got your context data. You've got your additional properties. You can set your zip, other fields, and you can also include custom code. And so really, it looks a lot like what you're already doing. You're just using that same data structure you have on the page to construct an object, which is a collection of data elements, and then you send it. And so the send event looks similar as well. You can send, you can send XDM, but you can also send data. And so in this case, you've got the data element that we constructed, and you're just sending that. And so when you send that to the edge, you're all set. And then I'm going to jump and explain. So this is how you construct that data so that it can be sent with minimal changes on your client side to your data structure. You can, of course, go through the process of reworking that data structure into something that isn't expressed in terms of eVars and props. But if you want to go in this intermediate step to more easily access the advantages of Web SDK and Experience Edge, you can do that. So you can just say, take this data that's expressed as product strings, analytic product strings, send it to the edge, send to analytics, no more thought. If and when you want to go to sending data experience platform, you're going to need to put it into XDM at that point. And you could rework your client-side data structure to be in XDM in sort of a semantic structure. Like I've got sort of more semantic XDM structure here for commerce things like price total, order type. Or you can do it server-side and map. So what you're seeing here is a mapping in a data stream. So when you send data to the edge, it goes to a data stream, and the data stream basically says where the data should go. You can say it should go to analytics, go to AP, go to both of those. You can have other configurations like do you want to add geo lookups and bot lookups, things like that. So as part of that, you can do some mapping, some transformation of the data at the edge. In this case, we've got some XDM in our payload, and that maps directly to similar XDM fields in my in my target schema, which is the schema, so the data structure you're going to use in AEP. In this case, I've mapped eVar1, which maybe semantically holding something called order type into something more semantic, more standard, like the XDM commerce.order type. I may have something like price kept inside one of the more complex analytic strings. So I've got the event string. So I'm using here sort of an example string like this. And you can see like I can copy this and then add JSON. I've already got it here. And I've got this sort of complex string here, the product string. As you can see, it's quite, it's got a lot of information. And this is just native analytics built up over the years. And you've got this complex event string. If I want to, for example, get the price out of event 2, using data prep, that would have been a bit more technical and difficult, or it's possible, but it takes more steps. We're making that more streamlined. So oops, I'll come back and edit mapping. So in here, I'm using a special function, and we've created several new ones as part of this release. They're live now, actually, related to pulling information out of complex analytics data structures. So then you can leave that complex analytics data structure client side, send it to the edge, and then handle manipulating it more easily server side, if that's how you want to do it. So in this case, we've got a few different ones for product string and a few different for event. I'm going to use the get event value, so it's going to pull the event value out. There's documentation on these to tell you exactly how to use it, but I'm passing it as an input, data dot underscore Adobe dot analytics dot events. So that's the the data structure I've used to store events, and then I'm asking for it to pull out event 2, the value of event 2. Oops, let me add JSON. Oops, all right, let's go with add the JSON. You go next, come up here. And so now that I've loaded the JSON into this session, and I've got a check here indicating my syntax is good, it's pulling out that 299, and I can sort of preview that as working in this case, and I will save it. So those are the two main changes we've had so far. I'm going to stop sharing and jump back to our deck, but hopefully that was clear. We've got a lot of this has been released already, and some of it is going to be released at least by the end of the month. So you'll have it all in your hands really soon, which is great. And I'm going to jump back to our deck briefly here. Goodbye, demo robot. Thanks for your help. So summarize and review. We've got new ways to take advantage of WebSDK and Experience Edge for the purposes of sending data to Adobe Analytics. And some of these also apply to other traditional solutions like Target and Audience Manager, but we're focusing on analytics today. So you've got the pass-through of this data portion of the payload to Analytics and Target. That's already been released. So if you want to construct the data portion yourself today and send it to the edge, that's already released. The tags part, the sort of interface and tags to do this yourself, is coming at the end of this month. So just a couple of weeks for that. The data pass-through the data portion to Audience Manager will also be coming at the end of this month. We also have those new data prep functions, the ones that we use to extract the event data out. Those are coming out those are already out, excuse me. And then one I didn't mention, I didn't have really time to go into today, but we made updates to the Mobile Edge Bridge extension to convert analytics format by default. So that's a bonus, and that is also already released. So there's a lot of exciting stuff coming out. So in terms of documentation, so the stuff that's already released, the data object mappings into analytics. So if you want to know what structure the data should be in to pass through to Adobe Analytics, this is how you do it. We've got that there. And then the new data prep functions are also documented. The extension functionality is not yet released, and the docs will release with them by the end of April, within a couple weeks. And then exciting, in addition to that, is we've got a WebSDK migration guide, which should be a great resource, and that will also be coming out by the end of April. So hopefully that's been great, been useful. I know it's been kind of a whirlwind tour of what we're doing. I'm happy to, take some questions. I know that there probably have been some populating. I haven't been able to look at the Q&A pod, but let's jump to that now. I'm also going to set a survey live here, just so people can respond to that as they want. So it's open, and we're not going to, show the results of that, but you can respond to that as you want. Meanwhile, I think we'll jump at the Q&A, and I've got some colleagues with me Thanks too much. I want to give a lot of credit to, this isn't the analytics team or the Experience Edge team. It's a real group effort to make these changes and to make this large ecosystem work. So we're really excited about that, and I got some of those folks to help here.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Shay. Let's get into some Q&A. All right, up first.
Okay.
Could you talk a little bit more about the implementation options when implementing the Experience Edge?
When implementing the Experience Edge, yeah. So the implementation options, I think if we looked at that chart, the initial graph, there in terms of sending data in, there's a web library, a mobile library, as well as an API if you're collecting data in other formats or you want to send it to yourself and send it in. So I don't know if that's what you're asking, but there is that in terms of, you've got those options in terms of sending data. In terms of implementation options, you have, as I was discussing today, you can send XDM to the edge, or you can construct XDM. That's like a more semantic standardized structure. You can also create custom XDM and send that in. WebSDK has a lot of configuration options. I don't think I can go to all of them here, but those are kind of the core options. And then what we've added today is a new data option, which is really, really nice. And that if you have a data layer structured in a certain way and you want to send data just to analytics, you've got it structured in analytics, or your data is expressed in analytics format, you can just send it directly to analytics in that without having to translate it into XDM so that it can then be translated back into that analytics format. So I hope that answered the question. Feel free to chime in if there's more specific sort of ask there.
Gotcha.
Let's see what else there are.
Up next,
do you want to read those out, Jared? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I can read them off, no problem. How can we best streamline our migration from existing libraries to Web SDK?
Good question. Good question. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you want to migrate. How you can migrate your existing library. I think this presentation is one way we believe we provide that, and that you may have structured your data in the language of analytics or target or audience manager, and you want to move to the Web SDK to continue sending data to those same applications. This allows you to use that same data structure without changing it. There's definitely a school of thought that it's better that you may want to just rebuild completely, and that'll depend on where you are. As an organization, do you have the time to invest upfront to rework the data structure you're collecting, and then go with a sort of semantic data structure, and then do you want to use XDM client side and send XDM to the edge? Do you want to send some sort of data structure that's your own personal data structure, send it to the edge, and then map it into things that that make sense to analytics or make our XDM for your system? So there's a lot of flexibility. I think this does streamline it a lot. I hope that's enough of an answer. Those are kind of the key ways to do that.
Gotcha. And up next, you spoke a little bit about the CJA. Do I need to use the Web SDK to send data to the CJA?
That's a good question. You don't. Again, you have options. A lot, I think if you're starting from scratch, we definitely recommend using the Web SDK. But we want to be cognizant of people who put a lot of effort into, say, setting up analytics. You put off measurement on the page to construct the data in a certain way and send it into analytics. If you do that, you can, if you say you're up today, you're using analytics, you can use the data connector, which I mentioned earlier in my slides, to send data. Maybe I'll just pull up that slide just to make it clear. I think everybody knows what the survey questions are. So you have this option here of sending data. You've got your data flowing into analytics as it is today. You can route it into Experience Platform directly from analytics. So it sort of goes from analytics database into Experience Platform data lake to be consumed by Experience Platform applications like CGA, CDP, Journey Optimizer. There are some pros and cons to that. I'll touch them briefly. Analytics Data Connector is quite straightforward. It's relatively just a flip of a switch. That data is going to land in Experience Platform in the form of eVars and props. So the data you're manipulating in CJA is going to be, have that syntax. And there is some options there to maybe manipulate it so that it maps also into some more semantic fields, some more standardized fields, like mapping eVar1 to order type instead of, something that's a little more opaque. Also, when you send data through Analytics Edge, obviously you don't have the opportunity, if you want to do personalization or other things, App Measurement only does collection for analytics. It doesn't do personalization. So Web SDK can do personalization, things like that. It rolls all those up. Also, Experience Edge obviously allows you to send to different locations. Analytics only sends to the one, and then through the backend, Analytics sends over. So I think there's different options on that, but you don't need Web SDK to do that. I think if you're starting from scratch, if you have the appetite, you may want to just, you have also this option of just sending directly in as an option. So those are your choices. Hopefully that helps.
Gotcha. Another question here. Can you run traditional tags rules succinctly with Web SDK, or is it recommended to only run one at a time? And what are the limits to this?
Interesting question. Use tags rules succinctly. I'm not sure what that means. The tags rules should work the same way, are very similar to what they are in analytics. You have a Web SDK extension, which should be able to do things similar to what the analytics extension does. And Web SDK, by nature is meant to kind of bundle up a lot of that same functionality. So I don't know if that answers that question. In terms of limits, there are some differences in terms of, how consent is handled, and a few other things, but we basically endeavor to have Web SDK cover all the function that App Measurement does and more. So basically fold in App Measurement, at.js, which is used for analytic or target, and the dill.js, which is used for Audience Manager, as well as the visitor identification library. So fold those all in. Hopefully that helps.
Gotcha. All right, and we got time for another question here. Does the Web SDK cost anything?
Great question. That's what I forgot to mention. Web SDK does not cost anything. It's free, just like App Measurement is. Once you have a solution, you can send data using it. So Web SDK doesn't cost anything. Experience Edge doesn't cost anything except for the forwarding to third parties. There's a fee for that, but forwarding into Adobe solutions like Adobe Analytics or the Experience Platform does not cost anything. So the whole data collection infrastructure for feeding into Adobe applications is free. The applications themselves are what you pay for.
Gotcha. All right. And we got another question here. Do I need to use data prep to transform my data?
That's a good question. You don't. Data prep's an option for transforming your data. You'll see a theme here. We have a lot of options for ways to do things. There's different ways to go about it. You can, data sent to AEP has to be in XDM format. So by the time it leaves Experience Edge and goes to AEP, it has to be in XDM format. So if you send it to the Edge in a non-XDM format, it needs to be translated at that point. At the latest, you can translate it earlier. You can send XDM from your page. There's also options to translate or modify data. It has to be in XDM format going to AEP, but if you want to make further modifications, split fields, clean data, there's a lot of power there. There's data distiller in analytics, or in customer journey analytics, there's derived dimensions. And that's one of the key sort of powers of CJ and the AEP experience, is there's a lot more ability to modify data after the fact. If you collect some data and it's got, some extra strings on it, something on it that needs to be cleaned out, you can do that. Whereas with Adobe Analytics, it has to, basically, as the data it gets is the data that's stored. So there's a lot more flexibility. So you don't need to use data prep. It's an option.
Gotcha. All right, and I think with that, that will be the end of our presentation for today. Thank you, Shay. And thank you to Adobe for making today's webinar possible. And last but not least, thanks to all of you out in the audience for your time and attention today. Today's webinar has been recorded, so you'll be receiving a link to that recording in a follow-up email. So keep an eye on your inbox for that. In the meantime, thank you all once again, and we will see you on the next one.
Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.